Obviously, one of the primary reasons that we're actually creating food plots is to draw deer to very specific areas. When we go ahead and simply plant something that deer really want to eat, and specifically when they want to eat it that time of year, now we're cooking with gas. Now we're getting deer to go ahead, or encouraging deer to spend time on this specific location. Obviously, if we're going to do that, it only makes sense to position that food so that it works to our advantage, as well as the deer utilizing it heavily. If the deer don't utilize it heavily, well, it doesn't really matter that the food is there. We have to have the whitetails actually utilize these resources in order for them to serve a valuable purpose. All right, so that brings up the next question. What can we actually plant there to specifically draw whitetails? Well, what you want to do is, more often than not, put a smorgasbord effect in. When you put a smorgasbord effect in, there's just not that one food that deer want and need all the darn time. By offering multiple food sources, now we're starting to cook with gas again, because various foods are going to peak in desirability and availability, and then they go ahead and they valley. Don't worry, other foods are peaking when this food is valleying. So the key is to go ahead and have a whole bunch of foods that are going to peak over season. All right, now, how can we utilize food even further to dictate deer movement? Well, there's a couple different ways. One we've already covered, and that is just simply putting foods there that deer really want. Another method that's often used is to go ahead and essentially create a snake of food, or a straight line of food, long and narrow. The idea is simply that the whitetail is going to jump on the food here, and it's just going to go ahead and follow it and feed. That doesn't really work that great. In my experience, that does not work that fantastic. What ends up happening a lot more with mature bucks is they cut across these long food sources. You end up getting does and fawns to follow it a bit. If you go ahead and slap a ridiculous number of licking branches along that food plot snake, well, that helps. It does help, but still, client after client that I've had over the years, past clients before I retired, that had tried stuff like this, they ultimately were disappointed time after time after time. There are places where snakes work, but they don't work generally for very long stretches, okay? And it really helps if you edge feather the heck out of them. So you got about a 5-yard wide band of, frankly, a living smorgasbord of greens for them to feed on at the same time, and great cover. The way that actually works best for me specifically for dictating movement with food for whitetails is to offer a smorgasbord of greens and then offer grains, or vice versa. Offer the grains and then offer the smorgasbord of green, but make it so they pass through one to get to the other. That transition zone between the green and the greens oftentimes is a tremendous place to set up on those foods. Yes, on any given day, a whitetail wants corn more than anything, soybeans more than anything, clover more than anything, white oak acorns more than anything, but they almost never, ever just eat one food source the entire time. It don't work that way. What they do is they eat a lot of this, and then they eat a little bit of that, a little bit of that, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. So if they really want greens, guess what? They're going to transition over to the greens 9 times out of 10 at some point. If they really want the grains, guess what? They're going to transition to greens 9 times out of 10 at some point during that feeding. By putting greens and grain, or vice versa, you end up creating a deer flow of movement. You do that, you're dictating movement, you can get your stands in the right place so much more effectively.
Final thoughts, brought to you by Huntworth.
Without a doubt, we're out there planting food plots, most of us, specifically to help the whitetail's health, while draw them to specific locations. By drawing them to these specific locations, we can utilize this to our advantage, obviously, with hunting. The more that we can, within reason, the more we can dictate movement to whitetails, you know what? The easier and more effective our management practices and hunting practices are. All right, so by offering smorgasbords, we tend to be able to draw more deer to that specific location. Snakes, skinny long trails of food, they serve a purpose here and there now and then, but they tend not to get mature bucks to just jump on that snake and run it. What they tend to do is they tend to cut across it. If you want deer to follow the food, make it shorter distances. Make it shorter distances and put greens on one side and grains on the other. Because yes, whitetails may want greens today more than grain, or they may want grains tomorrow more than greens, but they'll almost always eat both of them. By putting a transition zone between the two at a spot where it's easy to hunt, you are essentially just funneling those deer right by you.